City and Social Justice Committee to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Jackson? Here. Hoffman?
Present.
Miller?
Here.
Nelson?
Here.
Kuhn? Here. McGilvray?
Here. If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could I have an approval for the minutes of January 29th? Mr. Miller?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Hoffman. Is there any discussions or corrections?
Chairman?
Yes.
I just had a question, curiosity. Apparently we had a University of Michigan researcher and a Wayne State University grad student. Is that common to have people here? Were they part of the county or were they just doing independent research, if you know?
Probably just independent research. I really don't know for sure, but
Okay.
I can only assume that's what it was, and it's a meeting open to the public, so.
Of course.
Anybody
I was
can come.
just curious about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I get a, we don't need a roll call, correct? Voice vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed, motion carries. Now we need a motion for the approval of the agenda. Moved by Ms. Nelson, supported by Jackson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And at this point, we have public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address this committee? And if you would, 3 minutes or less, please. Hearing none, we'll move on with the agenda. First item is the communications. We have 2 items. What's the wish of the board? Mr. Miller.
No. I'm good with it.
Motion to approve?
Yep.
Supported by Jackson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed. Motion carries. We'll move down to item number 1, prosecuting attorney fiscal year 2019 victim rights grant amendment over 15%. And with us we have Emily McIntyre and Paul Walton.
I move the item.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Second it.
Supported by Miller. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is a extension of our grant to fund the Crime Victims' Rights Fund, and actually it's an increase in the grant funding. The state has recalculated the way that they are appropriating grants, so we are seeing an increase. As a result of that, we are looking to increase the services afforded to the victims of Oakland County.
The resolution approves the amended fiscal year 2017 reimbursement grant award from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to the prosecutor's office. So we had a contract in place, and that was signed in the fall. And then they told us about this increase after the contract was signed, so that's why we're in the amendment process. This reimbursement originates from the Michigan Crime Victims' Rights Fund, which was established in 1989 to pay for mandated crime victim services. This is the 27th year of grant acceptance, and you see the new contract amount is $766,249, and there is no county match. The increase is $527,796 from last year, and as Mr. Walton mentioned, this is a result of a new equitable formula that was adopted by the state. And the award does reimburse salaries and fringes for the Victim Services Section staff as well as various operating expenses.
Is there any discussion? Questions? Mr. Kuhn.
Yes, I'd like to thank both of you for the information that you provided when this was last before the committee. It was very helpful. But it seems like it's a great program, and you're providing a lot of benefit to these victims. And can you just give us a brief overview of what exactly these new staffers will do?
What we're looking to do is to provide additional services to, for example, small businesses, provide them notification as to the process as concerning if they have monies that are lost, the restitution process, the court proceedings. They're currently not mandated through the Crime Victims' Right Funds. They are not identified as a necessary victim report, but we want to make sure that we are providing notifications to them, because sometimes the restitution process is very confusing to victims. We're also looking to make sure that we can have increased court coverage for victims that are requesting assistance in court. The way that process works is oftentimes if you've never had the misfortune of appearing in a criminal case, God bless you, but if you have, it can be a very confusing process in the sense that depending on which proceeding that you're attending, oftentimes the victim has questions. The assistant prosecutor is usually at the podium addressing the court and or answering questions or asking questions. And someone that is a victim of crime oftentimes has questions as to what the proceeding is about, why are they doing it this way, what's the importance of the questions that are being asked, and having a crime victims advocate there, notifying them as to the process, the procedure, and familiarity with the court is invaluable.
Thank you. I know that I think you indicated that this is going to be a 3-year funding process where the county will be getting additional funding for the next 3 years?
We will be getting the same amount of funding for the next 3 years.
Which is an increase over what?
Yes,
we've been
yes, sir,
getting.
it is.
Correct.
And in here it indicates that one of the enhanced services will be to provide personal advocacy in more cases. Is that what you're talking about with regard
Yes,
to
sir.
businesses?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes. Next, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Sheriff's Office fiscal year 2019 Drug Recognition Expert call-out reimbursement agreement, grant application, or acceptance, I'm sorry. With us, we have Mr. McCabe and
Yeah.
Gay up here.
Gaia. We need a motion. Mr. Miller, supported by Nelson.
Morning. This is a grant acceptance for drug recognition expert deputies and within the sheriff's office. I just passed out a little explanation of what DREs are and how many there are in the county. There's presently 19, and what we do is, and this is specific to somebody where they exhibit things and similar to maybe driving under the influence of liquor, but when the deputy or the officer gives them a PVT, they're straight zeros across the line, so there's obviously some other underlying reason why they're acting the way they are, and driving the way they are. So we call these drug recognition experts to the scene. If somebody's working at any one of the departments, our dispatch center will call them and they'll respond from either the sheriff's office or any of the departments you see listed at the bottom. It's a cooperative effort by all of us together after hours, and basically it goes out, it's a message from the MABUS system to their smartphones, and they'll respond, and then if they believe they're under the influence, they'll be arrested. If not, then they'll release them at the scene or make other arrangements. This reimburses us, because it's done on overtime, reimburses the overtime expense for handling these calls.
Very good. Is there any questions or comments? Mr. Hoffman?
I have a question. When you evaluate somebody on the road like that, what is that process? How do they?
Put them through field sobriety tests, recite the alphabet, count backwards from 100, walk a straight line. There's a whole host of particular field sobriety tests that you can administer.
Is there any other testing, like medical testing or anything?
Well, sometimes if it's a case where we firmly believe they're under the influence of something, and even if a DRE isn't available based on their driving, we can get a search warrant for blood from a judge, and then we take them to hospital, draw their blood, and send it off to the lab and wait the results.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Kuhn?
Mr. Chair, a couple of questions about this. Does that mean that the county itself only has 3 of these drug?
The sheriff office has 3, there's 19 countywide, and we work cooperatively, so we may call and a Ferndale or a Clawson officer may respond, or vice versa. We may go down there, or Southfield may go to Clawson. It's a cooperative effort of a pool of 19 people,
Okay, and
19 police officers.
of course, given with the change in state law here, is there a need to have more training?
Oh, definitely, and we're pursuing that. As you know, with marijuana being legal now, they're going to to see a much greater need for DREs.
Okay, and it indicates that the maximum is 4 overtime hours. Is that just, what time frame is that, per year?
No, that's per call-out.
Per call out?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, great. And what kind of, so does this cover all overtime typically? Would 4 hours pretty much cover?
Generally, it should, yes, it'd probably be less than that, because they're not making the arrest, they're going out and administering the tests and doing the observation of the eyes and all that. They're specifically trained, I believe it's a 40-hour training class they have to go through in order to be certified as a DRE. It's either 40 or 80, Chris, do you remember? It's 80 hours. 80 hours of training in order to become a certified DRE.
And they can testify as an expert in court.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I have a question. What are we doing to try to get more DRE officers throughout the county? And that marijuana is legal now.
Yeah,
so-
I think what you're gonna see is, there'll be a push statewide, quite frankly, not just in Oakland County, but so far we've not had a problem in terms of having a DRE come out. But we're always looking to expand the program.
Is there any?
One of the problems is, I'll be quite frank with you, it's the 80 hours of training, because if you pull a guy out of Clawson PD and send him away for 2 weeks, generally you have to backfill him on overtime in order to do it. So we'll go to the state, we'll look to the state, see if our dispatchers, when they go to training, they can be backfilled on overtime by the statute. So it's a question of money.
Is there any pay incentive involved?
Not in our department, I don't know if there is in the other departments.
Okay. Any further questions?
In fact, we're training one more right now, as a matter of fact. We'll have 4.
Thank you. So we keep mentioning marijuana, and legalization of, what about like the opioid epidemic? Did the 19, officers that we have, were they increased because of the opioid epidemic as well?
No, this is just something that's developed over the years. It's another tool in the toolbox.
But right now, we see a further need because of the
Oh, absolutely.
legalization of marijuana.
Well, it's not just marijuana, it's prescription drugs, it's opiates, it could be anything, it's not just marijuana. What I'm saying is, there's no doubt in my mind, based on what's happened in other states that have legalized it, you're gonna have more people driving under the influence of marijuana. It's that simple.
Okay, thank you.
And that is illegal.
Mr.
Right.
Miller?
Marijuana may be
Driving
legal,
is
but you
illegal,
can't
right.
drive under the influence of it.
I think it's great, especially because vaping, I know they make oils of all kinds of narcotics that you would never know with the
You don't know
smell
what
or
they're on.
anything.
Right, exactly.
Ms. Jackson?
I guess I'm a little concerned because, I sit on the Anti-Drug Coalition, and there's several throughout the county, and they're community-based organizations, and certain type of substances are more prevalent in some areas than others. In Southfield, we've identified so far in discussion with our youth that marijuana is the drug of choice. And so that's why I keep asking about, is this being done to police marijuana? We know that marijuana has been legalized recently, and I just am very cognizant of just different drugs in different communities are being used. That's what I hear, that's what I see, that's the discussion. So that's why I kept asking about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Because of marijuana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Hoffman,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes. Now we need a motion to receive and file the information we received today. Motion by Nelson, supported by Jackson. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is a sheriff's office contract amendment, number 1 for the law enforcement services in the Charter Township of Commerce, 2019 to 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Hoffman, supported by Miller.
Commerce Township wants to add 2 deputies with no fill. This would bring them up to a total of 37, including the lieutenant and the command staff. As you know, on the west side of the county, Commerce Township is surrounded by very populous areas, including Novi and Walled Lake, Wolverine Lake. I mean, all that area is very congested. Since M5 went in, as you know, it dead ends at Pontiac Trail in Commerce Township. All kinds of development along that corridor. It's a very busy area for our deputies on day shift and afternoon shift, not so much on midnights. So the deputies, the substation commander there, Lieutenant Schroeder, will be adding, one of the deputies will be working 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and the other one from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., which is our busiest time out there for calls for service. So this was a suggestion by us based on statistics that they increase by 2 more. They had the funding, the township board unanimously approved the resolution, and we're requesting you to add the 2 positions here today.
Any discussion or questions? Mr. Kuhn?
Yeah, Chairman McGilvery, no fill, what does that mean?
No fill versus fill. A fill contract guarantees 2,080 hours of service. A no fill guarantees, no, it doesn't guarantee, it basically gives you somewhere between 1,700 and 1,800 hours of service, because when the deputy takes off on vacation or is off on, say, workers' comp or disability, their position can be filled, and in a no fill, the township then pays the overtime for that. In a no fill position, there is no overtime chargeback because you're guaranteed 2,080 hours. We only have a couple of communities, I think Addison Township and Springfield are the only 2, and they're very small communities comparatively, that have fills. A fill is much more expensive than a no fill, and if a station commander manages his station properly, which they all do, they actually reduce the cost of what a fill would be, even though they have to hire overtime sometimes.
Okay,
But
thank
we
you,
bill
sir.
back that overtime. Commerce Township works overtime, they get a bill from us, and it's at 100% cost recovery.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
McGilvery.
Yes. Motion passes. Number 4, Sheriff's Office Contract Amendment Number 1 for Law Enforcement Services, Charter Township of Lyon, 2019 to 21. Do I have a motion? Motion by Hoffman, supported by Jackson.
As you know, Lyon Township on the west side there, it's actually closer to Ann Arbor than it is Pontiac. It's only about 13 miles from 8 Mile Pontiac Trail to the city border in Ann Arbor. I know that because one night on midnights many years ago, I was bored and I drove down there to see how far it was. But it's a boomtown USA. It's on the I-96 corridor, and as the population's almost doubled in the last probably 15, 20 years. When we first started out there, we had 11 deputies that were, it was 10 or 11, I don't remember, a sergeant and 9 or sergeant and 10. And literally, because of the boom going on out there, if you've been out there, you see along I-96 the growth, the subdivisions, there's all kinds of residential building going on. And one of the reasons is it's close to Ann Arbor, it's close to Detroit, it's close to here, it's close to Brighton, Lansing. So it's a pretty good place to live, and they have the infrastructure to be able to build all these homes. So we recommended them that they increase their coverage for supervision, so this will add another sergeant to the contract.
Very good.
And again, the board unanimously approved that in Lyon Township.
Is there any questions or discussion?
Again,
Mr. Kuhn.
yeah, thank you, sir. Just because I'm new, I like to ask questions, try to figure things out. Sergeant, how, is that somebody who's then promoted from within, or is it someone who you send who's already a sergeant?
Well, it's not somebody you necessarily promote within. There will be a promotion as a result of this. That person being promoted will not be going to that position. It'll be an existing sergeant from someplace else. We have a list of sergeants and lieutenants that they can submit, you know, I'm currently assigned here, if an opening becomes available, I'd like to go there. So ultimately it's the sheriff's decision. They don't get to bump from station to station, but we'll pick the right person with the Lieutenant Venus is the commander out there, and pick the right person to fill that position, and that'll create a position someplace else that somebody gets promoted into.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Now, sometimes, it's not to say that they wouldn't necessarily go there if they got paid. If they're the right person for the job, they may go into it. But generally, when people get promoted, they generally go into corrections first to learn how to be good supervisors. That's not always the case. It's probably about 70% of the time. And then those supervisors can ultimately then request to be transferred to the road patrol or wherever, investigations, undercover.
Okay, and again, this is a result of some statistical analysis that the sheriff's department.
Oh, absolutely. They definitely, I mean, you only got one lieutenant, one sergeant to supervise 3 shifts. It's physically impossible to do.
Thank you.
This won't even give them round-the-clock supervision, but it'll give them more supervision.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
McGilvery.
Yes. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is Sheriff's Office, Oakland County Technical Response Consortium, OCTAC, Mobile Field Force Response Team Equipment Project. Do I have a motion? Motion by Nelson, supported by Miller.
Captain Wandrick, who's been here before in front of this committee, or maybe not this committee, but the prior committee. I don't know if you've been in this committee yet. Okay. He's gonna give you an overview of what OCTAC is and what it's about, and the genesis to it was the Mumbai attack, as I recall, where the sheriff decided, and jointly with the police chiefs, that we needed to do some training amongst all the agencies, so we're all trained on the same level, so that a Madison Heights police officer could stand next to a sheriff's deputy or a Southfield officer, and all be on the same page. But I'll let Chris give you the overview.
So back in 2009, OCTAC was created. One of the sheriff got together with all the chiefs of police, and they've all decided that we need to have a training consortium, so we can all train together to respond to a critical incident, so we all know what exactly we do together. So we train for active shooter, mobile field force, we train the fire departments for rescue task force. So if there is a major incident within Oakland County, any responding jurisdiction can respond and know what everybody else is doing.
And then, so what we're doing here is asking for equipment that further supplies it won't be just us, it's to every department that participates in OCTAC. And you can see by the map he just provided you, every department in the county now participates in OCTAC except for the Michigan State Police. That's why you see that white area up there.
And Royal Oak Township.
And, yeah, you know, they made a mistake. There should have been a little white mark down there.
Wait, there is.
It is there.
Oh, and the one he has, there is. Okay, he corrected it.
Okay. Any questions? Mr.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there some sort of plan? Is this new equipment, replacement equipment, and is there some sort of plan for equipment replacement?
Well, right now, back in 2012, we purchased 100 sets of mobile field force protective gear, and we purchased 2 trailers, and we stored 50 sets in each trailer. Just in case an incident would arise, we'd have the trailer on scene. We could send deputies to get outfitted in the appropriate safety equipment. This new equipment is to create a full-time team that's going to train full-time a year. They'll have their own equipment to respond to an incident, and then we're going to use the existing equipment to supplement other responding officers to the scene.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Hoffman.
Where does the money come from?
County General Fund.
Okay. Thank
Mr.
you.
Miller.
Yeah, I just have a question. I know you do active shooter for the officers, and this came up with, when I was on the campaign trail, is particularly Farmington, or it was actually Farmington Hills. Their question is if they could get trained in the active shooter, because it might not be an active shooter when they hit the scene, but when they're actually in the fire, it becomes an active shooter. That's one of their concerns with everything going on these days, if, you know, that could be a potential for them.
For the fire department?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because we've trained them with the rescue task force. Are they like looking to learn how to use firearms at a?
I think my understanding is just how to acknowledge, so they have the whereabouts of what's going on. If it's somebody that's pretending they're a victim but really are not a victim.
Yeah. Well, through OCTAC, yeah, we can set up training for them.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any further questions?
Just add, you won't see anything like this anyplace else in the state of Michigan, I'll tell you that. So you ought to be proud of all the police chiefs and the sheriff and what we're doing here.
We're always proud of you, Mr.
Everybody I've talked to, they love what you guys do. I appreciate it.
Again, Oakland County is a leader, and it's the chiefs and the sheriffs working mutually together.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson.
Just question for clarification on Schedule A. Can you give some examples of what deputy supplies would be?
Tell them what we're buying.
We're buying protective gear. We get helmets. We get chest protection, shin guard protection. It's like a riot suit. per se.
So that's separate than uniforms and protective gear, or is that the same?
It's just coming out of a different budget, because we're also purchasing tools to defeat, sometimes these protesters, they'll chain themselves together. We have to have tools to safely, get rid of their devices. If that answers your question.
Any further questions? Ms. Jackson?
Have we had any situations, recently, I know last year there was in Royal Oak, I believe, along Woodward, there was a clash amongst, two different, groups. Did we respond to that? Do you remember what I'm speaking of? I
We
believe that-
haven't had a full activation of the team, luckily. We've been put on standby numerous times. Like last year, we had this alt-right group that was supposed to be coming to town, and we had the team on standby because whenever they come to town, they have other groups protest them, and they like to clash and, disrupt the whole community. But we've never had a full activation of the team, luckily.
It's kind of like an insurance policy. Hopefully, you never have to use it.
Absolutely. All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
McGilvray,
Yes. Number 6, Sheriff's Office, acceptance of gift donation for a canine dog, Ricky. Do I have a motion? Motion by Miller, supported by Nelson.
We had a company, a gentleman that offered up a free dog, and we said we had the dog physically looked at. It had some minor dental work that had to be done, but it's in great shape. And we want to add this dog so we don't have to expend the funds to buy a new dog, which will save us about, what is it, $8,500. So we're happy to accept this donation. We have had a couple other times where a dog has been donated, but it has to be the right type of dog. You can't, have a Schnauzer in the canine unit, unfortunately. We do have people that offer that up sometimes, but this particular dog fits our needs, and it'll bring us back up to 15 canines that service the county. And again, they go all over the county. We get called by other departments all the time. We're the second largest, maybe third largest. I'm not sure how many Detroit has. But we have 9 dogs that do narcotic search and utility dogs. We have 4 bomb dogs and 2 accelerant dogs. Now, the accelerant dogs, all they do is accelerants. We have a full-time arson unit, fire investigations unit, and the dogs are assigned there. One of them's off duty right now because of an injury, but to the handler, actually. So we're just asking your permission to accept this gift.
Do I have a motion?
One question.
Yeah. Mr. Hoffman.
Sometimes you say you get dogs into the system. Are these dogs already trained then? Is that what puts the
Well,
value of
I'll just
80?
tell you, a prominent entertainer who doesn't like publicity, might be from Oakland County, might go to Pine Knob and play there, and I think you probably know who I'm talking about. Several years ago, went out, he purchased the dog for us. It was already, came from Europe, was already trained. We still have to put the dog through the Oakland Police Academy. While the dog may be trained in search and rescue and narcotics, it still has to go through a course at the Oakland Police Academy with the handler in order to, before they can come on full-time.
Okay, but is that what gives the dog an $8,500 value? Is the dog
Yeah, normally
already
when
trained?
we purchase our dogs from a company here in Oakland County that imports them from Europe, and it's $8,500 to do
But
that.
they're already trained.
They're trained when they get here, but then they have to go to the Oakland Police Academy and go
right.
through a several-week school in order to be acclimated with the handler and all those things.
Okay, but this free dog would be,
It's already trained.
because of the training.
It's
we'll have to
it's
pay-
already trained. Now the handler will go to the Oakland Police Academy with this dog.
Oh, and that'll be $5,500.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
McGilvray,
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have our presentation from the Health and Human Services Department, Homeland Security. Good morning.
Thank you very much for having us here today. I'd like to just start it off. I'm Kathy Fordsley, Director of Health and Human Services, and I'd like to introduce you to the leadership at Homeland Security. And I think you'll agree with me that we are very, very fortunate to have these two individuals here. This is Tom Hardesty, who is the manager of Homeland Security, and this is Kevin Scheid, and he is the chief of Homeland Security. And just to give you a little bit of background, Tom has spent over 30 years in law enforcement and actually retired at the end of 2014 as the deputy chief at Auburn Hills Police Department. And he was a primary planner for national security level special events because the Palace and the Silverdome.
And we work with Silverdome too.
Right, that's what I thought you did. Okay, so he had a lot of high-level, very large events that he was involved with at national security level planning. Also, after he left Auburn Hills, he was spent a year as a director for security for the Palace, for sports and entertainment, and also DTE Meadowbrook and Meadowbrook. And then he joined us at Oakland County, where he worked for a year and a half as the administrator at the medical examiner's office, and then was appointed as the manager of Homeland Security in 2017. And then Kevin has 30 years with the Madison Heights Fire Department, and he retired as the chief of the fire department in 2012. He was a hazardous materials specialist from 1986 to 2007. And he was part of the Oakland County Incident Management Team member from 2007 to present. MSU Emergency Response Solutions adjunct instructor from 99 to 2008. And then I met Kevin when you went to Wayne County, and you were the Emergency Preparedness and Exercise Coordinator from 2012 to 2014. And then he joined us here in 2014 and became chief in 2017. So we were really fortunate to have law enforcement and fire at the helm and Homeland Security, because so much of what they do really depends on them being able to speak the language of our first responders, and you'll be hearing more about all of the work that they do from Tom.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity here to talk to you a little bit about what we do and really the wonderful staff that I have there. As Kathy mentioned, really what we do now is a support role. Kevin and I no longer respond to the fires or the police actions. Our role now is different in helping to support communities and these agencies within the communities to make sure that we coordinate response in major events and that they have the resources they need to handle these events in their communities. So I wanted to touch a little bit on, as they mentioned, I came in 2017. Kevin was promoted to chief within a few months after that. So we had some turnover at the top of the agency. So looking to set some direction and some goals. And Kathy was actually new, I think the same week I was.
Turnover.
So yeah, we had some turnover. So some of the trying to set a focus for what we're doing is one, to increase the use of technology. Social media is not just a tool in emergency management and disasters. It's a need. People, whether we like it or not, often communicate via Twitter and posting messages on Facebook now. So first of all, getting a presence on social media and then increasing our presence on social media, along with plans of how that role would expand during an emergency. So that's something we've started and we're continuing to work on. That will be really probably a several-year process to get to the point where we need. One of the things about our unit is we prepare for a lot of things and we staff for every day, and then really it's drawing in resources and trying to manage a whole bunch more people than are there. So our staff day-to-day is not real large. One of the other things for technology is increased use of GIS. The county has a fabulous software in Esri for GIS use, and getting staff trained across the board on it, and the ability to use it, the ability to bring up pre-programmed maps with data and information based on whatever the circumstance is or the incident is. So it's a great tool that's there, and making more use of it. We're also, the board had approved previously a new software program for us. It's called BCG, and that's an emergency management software to help us manage events. It will help us to be more efficient, help us to, again, get information from communities about what's going on, as well as what resources they might need, and the ability for us to push this information out to decision makers and county executive staff more quickly and again more efficiently, as well as getting that information up to the state. Emergency management for the county is the go-between between local communities and the state. Madison Heights cannot declare an emergency and request resources from the state of Michigan. It has to go through the county. So this software will help us do that in a more efficient and a more effective way. We've also looked to continue to expand our presence, as well as educating our communities as to what our role is and how we can help them and assist them. One of those is hazard mitigation. I'll touch on that specifically a little bit more in a few minutes, but that's one of the ways we've been recently really pushing out to our local communities. We submitted for and had a grant for an integrated emergency management course in Maryland that took representatives from 52 different communities down to to help work through plans for a complex coordinated terrorist attack, find out what we are ready for, what we're not ready for, and where we need to improve, and again with that coordination of multiple communities. We also are looking to increase our training and resources, but specifically for complex coordinated terrorist attacks. And one of the reasons is that's, in the scenario wise for an assault, that's the most complicated thing we're likely ever to face. So if we put together plans that we're ready to deal with that, that will help us deal with that next level down, whether it's an active assailant, even if it's a person with mental instability, that type of thing. The response of how you're going to treat that and try to stop the threat is going to be similar. So we prepare for the more complicated, and that helps us be ready for a broad range of activities. Because coordinating that type of response is really what can become challenging in a major event like that. And also, the other role we'll play here at the county is integrating some of these principles into the county complex. Our division, along with safety and the Sheriff's Department, help work on safety planning for the thousands of county employees, the multiple county buildings. So we routinely discuss policies and practices. We have a threat assessment team. The moment something happens, the safety director, the lieutenant in charge of the campus, and myself will talk generally within a minute or two of whatever's going on, and then if need be, engage the county executive staff or pass information along that they might need to make decisions. We've also assisted in some of the first aid training, some of the stop bleed kits. We're reviewing policies for package and mail delivery on campus, constantly evaluating, besides just outside communities, but for the campus, how we keep things safe. Emergency management is a big part of what we do. This is kind of the cycle of emergency management with mitigation, preparedness, which is planning, response, and recovery. So I'll go through these and kind of explain what we do in that just to kind of demonstrate how it is and what we do and why we do it to fit into this cycle. So I mentioned mitigation earlier, and the goal behind mitigation is to prevent or lessen the effects of a disaster. The federal government, or FEMA, looks at it two ways. Pre-disaster mitigation, meaning what things can you do to help minimize the impact of a disaster. For example, it may be moving homes that are in a floodplain, shoring up a river or a stream that traditionally overflows, or maybe there's, it could be even as much as rerouted if need be. So what things can you do ahead of time to try to mitigate that disaster. And the other side is immediately after. You've had a disaster come through. It hit a community in North Oakland County. One of the things they found, maybe there was not enough tornado shelters, and so the feds might say, okay, here's, based on your plan, you knew this was a concern, you didn't have the money, we see this happened, and they'll help fund that. So the purpose of this is all to increase community resilience. The idea is, yes, disasters happen, but how can we're never going to eliminate Mother Nature's impacts or, unfortunately, people's impacts, but how can we minimize or mitigate those? So there are specifics requirements when we do this. We're required by FEMA to update our hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. This took, I came in early 2017. This took the entire year to put together. We meet with representatives from every single community in the county. We talk to or meet with representatives from every school, from hospitals, public meetings for citizens, taking input on what do people think or feel are the biggest threats, because perception is part of what you're trying to address, is how do people feel, as well as a scientific evaluation of what are the threats and hazards. What is the history of what has really been faced here? We aren't real concerned with tsunamis in Michigan. That's not something we'll have to face, most likely. However, we do get ice storms and winter storms that Florida may not see. So FEMA requires this plan, one, to even apply for the pre-mitigation money I mentioned, you have to have a plan in place. And then if you have a disaster and you want to seek federal assistance, again, if you don't have an adopted plan, the feds can say, sorry, we're not going to give you any money. So we spent all of 2017, along with a consultant, putting together this plan. It's more than 800 pages long. And then we spent the last 10 months, and actually just last week, the last community finally adopted it as well. So all 62 communities, along with the county, have adopted it. And this puts us in solid footing for, if we have a disaster, to be in position to seek funds for it. And now our staff, we've split the county up into sections, and our staff is going out and specifically seeking out communities and asking if they have a mitigation project that might be important to them. Can we help them put together a grant request, or help them put the project in? Even having a project submitted, if there is a disaster, you have a greater likelihood of getting funds after it if you've submitted a project. So seeing how we can, again, assist our communities with that. Planning, again, is a big part of what we do. We are required by the state to update our emergency operations plan every 4 years. This one was also due in 2017. So along with both of Kevin and I being new in our positions, once every 20 years, these are both due at the same time, and it was that same year. So we had a busy year that year, but it was also a great opportunity for us to put our own footprints on things. So this plan is designed to put together at least a playbook for how different sectors might deal with a disaster and emergency that comes up, because again, our job is coordination. So we have, for example, the water main break that happened. Initially you think, water main break, really, why would emergency management be involved in that? Except then we learned that this water main break is going to impact about 300,000 people, at least 2 hospitals, dozens of long-term care centers, not to mention the residents of these communities. So in our EOC, we are looking at, okay, what is the health department's role? And there is a checklist for things that health department immediately might want to think about. Law enforcement role, fire department role, the emergency management role, communications role. We also brought in Great Lakes Water Authority, Water Resources. So they're all there together. And these plans are important that help us prepare for that. And then all of our, again, all the local communities adopt these emergency operations plan as well. The idea being that when these things happen, we are all on the same page with how we're going to respond. And it fits right in with what Captain Wondrick mentioned earlier. That's specific to the type of event they're talking, but we're looking at all manner, all hazards. We also get involved in hazardous materials planning. I don't know if any of you, when you're coming in here, we're seeing the black smoke to the east. There's a US Ferrothane in Auburn Hills has got a fire of a bunch of plastic barrels outside. It's just plastic barrels, at least what we have so far. It's not chemicals involved. But we maintain records on hazardous substances that any businesses are required to report. There are about 225 businesses in Oakland County that have what the feds determine to be very hazardous substances. So we maintain that information on what those chemicals are, where they're stored at in the facility, what the plan is, if there was a fire like this, if it did involve those chemicals, how far is the radius that you might need to have evacuation, or is it a chemical that means shelter indoors? These plans are maintained in a system and done in conjunction with the local first responders, and then they have access to the system and these plans. So they could pull them up. If they're responding to US Ferrothane, likely Auburn Hills Fire Department pulled up the information in Tier 2 Manager to see if there was things there that they needed to worry about, and if so, how would they react with that? The grant that was in the communications for today is specifically for that, for us to maintain the SARA Title II and the information on those chemicals. And again, I mentioned threat and hazard risk analysis. That's something we're constantly doing. The idea is not to just say we think this might be an issue, but to do an actual analysis of things. And it's not even just us and not even just our communities. We're doing it throughout the region and throughout the state we're involved with. We also have taken a larger role recently in schools and school planning. Several years ago, the legislature passed requiring that schools report to us their scheduling of drills, and we've always had a pretty great success, anywhere from 98 to 99% in the county that report their drills to us, which is very high. I would probably be suspicious if we said we had 100%, that somebody's not telling the truth, because you rarely have that. But last year the state started requiring, they opened up Safe Schools grants, which is great. And the state put money in that grant for them to hire a couple people, and then they tell the schools that the local emergency management has to review and approve your emergency operations plans, which again I think is a good idea. Schools should have emergency plans. They should be reviewed. We have over 450 school buildings in Oakland County, so it's great that the state did this and got themselves a couple extra people to work in their office, but sometimes it does come with challenges. And like usual, many of these will turn them in at the last minute. So today I've probably had over 1,500 pages in emergency operations plans submitted that they want us to review, and their deadline is going to be on Friday. Really the rest of the week we'll have 2 or 3 staff that'll be dedicated to looking, because we want these schools to get the grants. We want them to get the money to increase security. We'd prefer that they have these plans because they're good and they want to have them to operate, not just for money. But it is one carrot of a way to get it done. But that's how we get involved in school planning as well. I mentioned earlier organizing. That's a big part. There's 62 cities, townships, and villages. There's around 48 to 50 fire departments. I think 42 police departments, 38 different public safety answering points, regional, state, federal agencies, hospitals, med control, EMS, public health. Again, that's our role, is trying to organize and coordinate. Volunteers play a big role in any disaster. If we have a major disaster and emergency, there will be hundreds of people that show up and say, I want to help. Trying to identify the ones that can be useful and how to put them to use and keep track of them and where they go, that's a big role that we would play in that. There are a lot of faith-based organizations out there that are a tremendous resource and a tremendous help, in addition to the Red Cross and Salvation Army. So there are a lot of volunteer groups that will be that force multiplier if something happens, but you have to have plans and be ready to use them in an organized fashion. I And part of our role is to continue to build relationships with a lot of these agencies so that you know people. Kathy mentioned the fact that Kevin and I have a police and fire background. You know, I know many of the police chiefs and the fire chiefs and some of the EMS people around the county, and these are the people that we're often working with and trying to organize with. So having some history and some background with them and some credibility that we've been there and done some of this ourselves, it's not just on paper, helps maintain that relationship. You know, and trying to support this. And then we have even daily local volunteers. Our staff we don't maintain a CERT team ourselves, but many of our communities do. We help support those teams with training, with grant funds for supplies. The Oakland Crisis Response Team, we help support that. That's the group that goes out when you have a school where a kid commits suicide or a business that has a tragedy. These are crisis counselors that go there, all volunteers, all certified, and volunteer their time to go help deal with these crises right after they happen. We have a backup radio system. Should our normal system crash and our phones crash, we have a backup radio system, again, made up of amateurs that can talk really anywhere around the world. In Puerto Rico during the hurricane last time, it was these amateur radio people that were getting the communications out first. And that's another system of volunteers that we're using on a daily basis. A big part of what we do is grants. People like us when we have money. Unfortunately, the money went from being a huge amount after 9/11 to dwindling each year. Captain Wondrick was talking about the OAKTAC gear earlier. That first 2 trailers and all that equipment was purchased with Homeland Security grant money. The funds are several $100,000 less a year now than they were even when we purchased that equipment. So the competition for those funds and what is out there gets stiffer, and it gets harder to support some of these things going on. And a big focus over the last several years has been active assailant. As he mentioned, the OAKTAC has trained more than 2,000 officers in active assailant. A bunch of firefighters and rescue task force, continuing to examine where do we go further with that. Commissioner, you mentioned Farmington Hills and the firefighters, and again, it's trying to coordinate multiple agencies, both police and fire, and trying to get a consistent response and training and how they feel about that. So we support other training functions. This morning, we were in Southfield for a community active assailant training for faith-based and schools that they're putting on and supporting their program. Later in April, Jim Edson from Farmington Hills has started hosting an active assailant conference, the largest one in the world that's here. This will be the 5th year for it. We help support that, again, to bring all these people together to get a consistent response in the county. First responder training, one of the main things that came out of 9/11 was having the incident command structure and response. The reality was fire, prior to 9/11, fire had adopted this model because of forest fires. It's a structured, organized way to manage a large group of people. Police really didn't, and kind of had to be forced into it. And after 9/11, realized that we didn't just some want to do it, but it had to be done. So the federal government passed requirements that agencies who get these training dollars and use them have to have incident command and national incident management training. We have instructors that do that, so we provide this training around the county. You have constant turnover in these public safety agencies, so it's not something you train once and then you're all done. Command staff and people are always turning over, so it's a constant training that we do. We mentioned active assailant for police, rescue task force, complex coordinated terrorist attack, along with, we mentioned the all hazards. You know, we're preparing for weather and tornadoes and train derailments and hazardous materials. We work with hospitals and long-term care centers. The state, again, put some requirements that long-term care centers have some plans in place. and do a vulnerability assessment and do some drills and training. We can't write those plans for them or do a drill for every one, so instead we put on classes in conjunction with health to teach them how to do their own hazard vulnerability assessment, how to do a tabletop, how to do a drill, how they might work together to get some of these things done. We can't necessarily do it all for them, but we can give them the tools to help them be compliant and be more prepared. Again, the campus, we do training for the Emergency Operations Center with staff that will have roles there. We do building drills and training. Every building on campus is required to do so many drills every year. We actually audit and go watch every 2 years. We'll get to every building on the campus and do an audit of their drills and see how they're doing. And again, the Michigan Critical Incident Management System, which is the state's version of emergency management, we're feeding information into that. So again, the state is gathering information on the big picture. And that's in use for even things this last weekend for the windstorm. We're on there looking at what's happening at our community, but also around, and it's a way for us to share that information. We can do a lot of training and a lot of teaching, but these skills have to be practiced. So we do everything from workshops, tabletop exercises, which is sitting around talking about, functional exercises, which is that next level of actually doing some of it, to a full-scale exercise where we did one at the airport last year with a simulated plane crash and fire, hazmat response, first responders, all the way through the medical examiner's office coming out there. So we put together those exercises and drills, evaluate them, and then do after-action reports. And then we take that information and try to use that towards some of the grants and the purchases that we're doing. So we're funding things that we see we have a need for. I mentioned the Emergency Operations Center. That's the place, that's our building. It's a room with 45 computers in it where you put the decision makers for these different roles: police, fire, med control, health department, and then some of the other positions vary with what's going on. We had Great Lakes Water Authority. When there was the gas line fire in Lake Orion last year, we had a rep from Consumers Energy. Recently, during the cold weather spell, when Macomb County had the fire at their center, we had staff, myself and a couple others in our Emergency Operations Center, a rep from the state police, and then we're on with Macomb County and the state, communicating about not really what's going on right now as much as what are we going to do in 6 hours if that gas runs out, what are we going to do in 12 hours when homes start reaching that critical level and you have people. So looking at that, really that next period and what we're going to do with that and how we're planned for it. They look at it in kind of 3 ways. There's the normal everyday operations or a steady state. We call enhanced state or partial activation, and that's when we, like for the gas issue, when we have a couple of people in there. That's most commonly what we have. It might be everything from a tornado warning to a gas line to the water main where we have a partial activation. And full activation is when we're getting representatives from all these different departments, again, working together to communicate, because that means that there's wide-ranging issues, and now we're having to make decisions on where resources might go. And that's when the tough decisions start having to be made. We have one urban search and rescue team that's going to be available within the next 60 minutes, and 3 communities are requesting it. So which one is it going to go to first? Where are we going to get that next one from? Where are we going to get the one after that from? How soon are they going to be there? So trying to having plans in place for those decisions and being able to make them based on need, not just necessarily on the first person that asks for it. Disaster declarations. If a disaster or emergency happens that's more than a community can handle, they can declare a state of emergency or a disaster, and that then comes to the county executive, and they make a decision. If they, again, feel it's above the resources that we have, and we're looking for state aid for either money or resources, then the county executive makes that request to the governor's office through the state police emergency management. and by statute, that's the county executive's role. The Board of Commissioners would have a role if after 7 days, the county executive could declare a state of emergency for Oakland County. And that's in place for 7 days by statute under his authority. After 7 days, then the county executive has to seek approval from the Board of Commissioners to extend that declaration for state of emergency. Really the key part of the Emergency Operations Center is information flow and communication. Again, we're not responding and being the people that go out and put out the fire or respond to the incident, but we're trying to coordinate those resources. One of the big things that we learned from the class in Maryland this last year is when you start getting multiple incidents going on, communication is going to be difficult. There's information, a lot of information flowing. The key is accurate and timely information. That's where it's difficult. So when you put these people in the same room from these different levels and different disciplines, you have the ability to communicate and get that accurate information quickly. And then we can pass that information again up to the county executive level. So they have information to make good decisions as quickly as possible, as well as then pushing information down back to our communities and back to the first responders so that they can deal with what they're dealing with on the scene. So this helps give situational awareness. Again, we're trying to get resources and coordinates. Guidance on policy. We do not dictate how anyone handles a scene. However, policy guidance that we get from the county executive staff on what doing. And then we're preparing for recovery. The TV cameras and everybody are going to be there during the disaster. The longest part of what we're going to deal with, especially our office, is going to be recovery. The flood in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, there may still be some open cases on that with the federal government with aid. It goes on for years afterward. Paperwork, trying to get people money when it's appropriate for damage that happened. So it's a long process. Even for an active assailant, there's a lot of coverage when the incident happens, but there's going to be presidential, even executive visits that are coming in. There were thousands of backpacks and purses in Las Vegas, items left on the ground that have to be managed and trying to get them back to family members. A huge area that's trying to be cordoned off. You know, now you're looking to feed and have restrooms and all those things for the first responders that are there. So this recovery process is going on for a long time. Seeking funds is part of what you're going to do. Many times these disasters, part of the reason we say that that community or the county can't handle it is because it's gotten expensive over what we're normally equipped to handle with our daily operations and budgets. So the state has the ability, the governor, to award up to $1 million. That was actually just increased a couple of years ago. It was at $100,000. So if the county executive declares a disaster, requests that from the governor, if the governor agrees, they may award up to $1 million from the state. And then from there, the state requests it to the federal government and asks for a federal declaration. There's a lot of information that they have to have pretty quickly. You know, we're having to have preliminary damage assessments within 72 hours. This may be even if you can't get to an area because water's there, you're having to get them preliminary information and then more detailed after that. So we're working again closely in these type of situations with the state police and emergency management, federal emergency management, and again the disaster relief organizations. That recovery continues with mass care, debris management. It sounds simple. You have a bunch of garbage, you pick it up and put it in the truck and take it away. Except that FEMA will require that if you're going to put in for reimbursement to remove this tree, that you take 3 pictures of that tree from different angles with GPS coordinates before and after the tree was cut up, and that truck that you're going to put the garbage in, that it's weighed and inspected prior to being filled up and weighed and inspected once it reaches the dump. Unfortunately, there's been a fair amount of fraud in this type of thing where trucks are only getting half emptied because then the company's got to make more runs and then they get more money. So there's a lot of process and rules that go into that. And again, it's our job to help. We're not going to go in and rescue a community. Again, that's not our role. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources. We're not going to go do it all for them. Our role is to help coordinate those resources for them, help get them through that process and get the money and the resources that they might need. Some challenges that we have, I mentioned earlier, a lot of grant funds and a lot of money was available after 9/11. Hazmat vehicles, hundreds of thousands of dollars each purchased around the county. Other equipment that we were fortunate and able to get with grant funds, but much of that equipment is either reaching end of life or it's expensive to maintain. And as I said, 10 years ago, our Homeland Security grants were over $1.5 million annually. Now we're down to around $700,000. I talk about employee turnover, which means constant training, and I don't mean us, I mean for the public safety agencies. Aging infrastructure means bridges and roads and things that do have an impact on resources. Apathy, the reality is the further we get from 9/11, the less people think about those kind of things. But also, we don't have hurricanes here. We don't have forest fires, not in the sense that they have out west. So we don't have a lot of big disasters here. So the apathy isn't even necessarily just with the general public. It can be with public safety agencies who are trying to prioritize what they're doing. So dealing with the opioid crisis or something else might be a higher priority than doing some of the emergency management planning. So it's, again, our job to help educate them as to why it's important. And sometimes that means even challenges with our facility with, right now it's electrical issues. Building services will probably be coming to you with a proposal pretty soon on trying to do some electrical upgrades. We share with dispatch for the sheriff's dispatch. And so some challenge that we've had there, challenges with space and technology in the building we have, which are things that everyone has everywhere. So things that we will continue to face and continue to work through. I think I mentioned before, Kevin and the staff there who were there before I was have really done a great job at setting this up and I will say making me look good often when we deal with the public. They've put a lot of these plans in place and a lot of things that will make us successful when we deal with things in the future. Some of the things we're looking at going forward, one of my big goals would be EOC accreditation. The only accredited EOC in the state is the state police. So that is something that I would love to see us shoot for someday. It will take some work both internally in our procedures as well as with the physical structure to upgrade and make sure we meet those, but it's a good goal to have. I mentioned the complex coordinated terrorist attack training. One of the recommendations out of that was to get a county-wide response plan. Again, trying to get multiple communities and agencies to sign on to a plan. That's a big goal, but I think it's a good goal to have. We're continuing to identify these mitigation partners that we might have in the community and how we might help the communities seek grants. And continuing to integrate our protocols and response for fire and specialty teams. We have a couple of different groups that do hazmat and urban search and rescue, trying to continue to get them together more for county-wide response. An incident management team, which is a mid-level group that can help on the scene during a major disaster. They're helpful to the scene commander by organizing their resources, and really they're helpful to us because they help get clear requests and clear information to us about what's going on, as well as a place for us to direct those resources to. That's tried to keep it as succinct as I could as far as an overview of what we do, but we're certainly open to questions that we might be able to answer.
Mr. Hoffman.
I have a question, thank you very much. My question is, you talk about the relationships you have between these different groups of volunteers. Is there any relationship between actual contractors, if there's an emergency? I know in the case of a gas leak, Consumers has their own equipment, water leak, municipalities have their own equipment, but is there any effort or arrangement between contractors with that type of equipment? Because you can only buy so many, and I know your job is only to coordinate. but I'm just curious.
There's two levels to that. Major ones, like consumers, DTE, those, we have pretty regular meetings, Great Lakes Water Authority, pretty regular meetings and resources and contact, 24-hour contact with them. As far as local other resources, we actually maintain a contact list, a database of equipment that is available out there, of thousands of pieces, and we have a part-time staff that she goes through that and follows up with these contractors and businesses around to make sure they're still in business, they still have the type of equipment we might be looking for, and that this information is valid. It's a resource list, and it's something that's constantly being updated.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes, Chairman McGilvery, thank you. First, can we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
That would be helpful. And the hazard mitigation plan and the emergency operations plan, are they available to review? Or, I know they're massive
Parts.
documents.
Parts of them are available. There is a public portion of the hazard mitigation plan that's actually available on our website,
Okay.
as well as a public portion of the emergency operations plan. The details, for example, in the hazard mitigation plan, there are parts in there that detail vulnerabilities for schools or communities. That is information we do not publish because it could be putting out a roadmap to where we might be vulnerable. But some of that basic information is available on our website. We call it the public portion of those documents.
Okay, great. And how many staff do you have in your department?
We have 9 full-time and 2 part-time.
And what are they?
What are they?
Yeah, I guess there's the chief
Oh.
and the manager.
Yeah, Kevin is the chief. We have 4 specialists, we call them. They're the ones that are on call. I don't think I even mentioned the weather sirens. They're also responsible for activating the weather sirens for tornado type or high wind warnings. So they're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're a mixture of some are retired police, some retired fire, and one gentleman who came to us from private industry and risk management. And they do broad range, anything from exercise planning to training, and again, working on these emergency operations plans with communities. And then we have 2 solution area planners. These are grant-funded positions. For example, the active assailant training. A $8,000 request from the federal government to the federal government for reimbursement resulted in 162 pages of documentation. So these 2 solution area planners are grant funded to help manage the grants and all of that paperwork and the requirements that are in there. And then we have one position, one of the part-time positions, she manages the Sarah Title III information with all the hazard mat duties, and she's also a GIS specialty for us. She does GIS work and then some training with the rest of the staff on GIS. We have a full-time office administrative assistant and then a part-time office assistant who also does a lot of the follow-up with contact information and keeping those lists current.
Great, thank you. And would it be possible for us to visit the Emergency Operations Center at some point?
You're welcome.
Absolutely. They said that today wasn't a good day for you. Y'all have other things to do, but absolutely let me know. I have some cards with me. We can set up a tour either individually or as a group, whichever you prefer.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I have a couple. What kind of funding do we get annually from FEMA?
We get about, I don't know if the Homeland Security technically considered coming from FEMA. We get about $700,000 to $720,000 in our major Homeland Security grant. There are restrictions on that. Some of that as to how we can use it. There's a portion that is required to be used towards law enforcement. A big chunk of it has to have what they call a terrorism nexus. It doesn't mean that it has to be specifically says you're only going to use that to fight terrorism. For example, a lot of our urban search and rescue and hazmat supplies come out of those funds, but they have to be able to be used for things like that. So the hazmat equipment could be used if a terrorist attack in gas or anthrax. The urban search and rescue equipment could be used in a building collapse from a terrorist attack, but it's also available to us if a building collapses from a weather event. That is most of the funding that we get. We will be seeking some mitigation funds, and actually the goal would be that the communities will seek them, that we help them seek these mitigation funds from FEMA if they have projects or things that they would like to do to help minimize the impacts of a disaster.
And do we get any state money at all for Homeland Security?
Well, generally what happens is that the feds actually give the money to the state. The state in Michigan, states anywhere can take up to 20%. Michigan always takes 20%, and then they pass down the rest of that money through. But they can take 20% off the top for there. So the money we get has the state's name on it, but it's coming from the feds. We don't really get money directly from the state, out of the state's budget, unless there was a declaration of some sort.
Okay. And my last question is if, say Royal Oak has a tornado, God forbid that happens, but if it did, what role would you play in that particular incident? You're not going to send manpower to Royal Oak.
We would activate our emergency operations center. We would see, first of all, immediately what resources do they need? Is this over and above what they can handle themselves and their immediate mutual aid? So is there resources that they need? Are they looking for this urban search and rescue team? Is it, chances are that tornado may not just hit Royal Oak. It might hit a path and hit a few communities in there. So are there resources and coordination? Are there other things that are going to be going on after that? Are there health risks from water or people that don't have a place to stay? Are we going to coordinate how many people are out of their homes and going to need it? So what resource can we help get there? And then we're going to be looking to assist them after that with damage assessment. We have a lot of equipment. We have staff that's trained that can train others in damage assessment, so we could help them get up, coordinate, and get running damage assessment information that they're going to need to decide if a declaration is going to be made where they can request funds. Is there enough damage there to do that? And we're going to coordinate all that information and pass it through to the state to get that, because Royal Oak can't make that request to the state. It has to go through us.
Well, and the EOC too, activating the EOC, providing a place for all of the various disciplines that might have resources, as Tom was mentioning, bringing them into one central location where they can communicate with each other, report out hourly on the information that they're gathering while they're there. It provides a really great opportunity to get that, provide this location outside of the area where the impact may be.
You mentioned Royal Oak. If it impacted the hospital, we
Right.
have a seat for med control
Right.
in there. So if Beaumont's impacted, is their ER open or closed? Do they have people in that hospital that are then going to have to go to other places? How many beds are available out there? How many ambulances are available? So some of that coordination is then going on through our.
And then we would facilitate calls between all the hospitals to let them know what's happening so that they can start communicating about what they might be. They may make decisions to cancel elective surgeries to be able to divert other types of patients to those hospitals. All of this is going on behind the scenes during that kind of an event. And sometimes there is the very rare occasion where you actually might be deploying people, as would health. In fact, in terms of the flood, we provided some really great resources to the community where Tom had members of his staff, health had members of their staff, go into the community and really provide one-on-one assistance to individuals in that community in terms of getting them connected to resources, helping them with what they might be able to recover monetarily, and also health was working simultaneously with trying to get people vaccinated properly that were exposed to contaminated water.
During a major disaster, FEMA's going to come in and set up they're going to work with us to pick a best central point that people can get to. So then, in that case, we're going to have staff there helping to get that center set up and running, helping to get resources and people there.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman.
I just want to say I'm glad I live in the United States in Oakland County. Thank you again.
Thank you for your support, which helps us to get these things done.
Absolutely.
Any further questions? Hearing none, thank you so much for your, Kevin, next time speak up a little bit, though. Would you please?
Karen doesn't have any
I'm
trouble
used to
with
this
that.
with you, Chairman McGilvery. I think I've seen you on that side of the table before.
Yeah, Kevin's daughter and my daughter went to school together,
How
so
about that?
Yeah.
we've known each other a long time. Hearing nothing else, meeting is adjourned.
Nice job there.